There are two ways that you can make your 3 by 3 inch tiles. I would suggest the heavier paper because you will be using these to trace around. So I'm using a piece of sketchbook paper. It's 9 by 12. You could use cardstock if you have cardstock. But if you don't have either of those, copier paper will work. You'll just have to be careful when you trace. So the easiest method is if you have someone at home that may have a little cutter, usually sold for scrapbooking, and all you would have to do is line up to the 3-inch mark with your paper, cut a 3-inch strip, and do that until you run out of paper. And since this is 9 by 12, that should give us three strips of 3-inch paper. Okay. Then you're going to take those strips, and depending on your cutter, you might be able to get all of your strips at once, or you might have to do one at a time. But you again line it up to the 3-inch mark and slice through them, and that will give you your 3-inch squares. So that is the easiest method. The second method to create the 3 by 3 inch squares is to measure them out. Anytime we measure, we always want to make 2 reference marks. We usually want to work end to end of paper if possible. So I have a 12-inch ruler here, so it should reach when I do my measurements for drawing the lines. If you have a shorter ruler or a longer piece of paper, sometimes you have to make marks halfways up the page to connect bottom to middle, and then marks at the top to line up. But you always want 2 reference marks because it's very important that your 3-inch squares are 3-inch squares. They just can't be close. They have to be exactly 3 inches by 3 inches. So what you do is you first of all need to identify where the end of your ruler is for the 0. So here on my ruler there's a long line at the end. So that's my 0 mark. Sometimes your end of the ruler itself will be the 0. If you're not sure, you can always use the 1st inch mark to line up the edge of the paper with, and just remember that. So if I use the inch mark and I'm trying to make a 3-inch square, my first measurement is going to be at 4 inches and not at 3. Okay. Since I do have a line here I can use, I'm going to, at the bottom of my paper, line up that 0 marking to the edge of my paper, and I'm going to mark every 3 inches along this bottom edge of my paper. So the last one is at the 12-inch mark, so I don't have to make that mark. And then this is the second most important part when measuring. You never want to turn your paper. If for some reason this paper has been accidentally cut in a slightly slanted manner, if it measures 12 inches down here and 11 and 15/16 up here, that is enough to throw off all of your measurements. So you want to slide the ruler to the top. You never want to turn your paper. And you want to again line your 0 up to the left edge, and again mark every 3 inches. And again, my 12 inches at the end of the paper, so I don't need to mark that. So now that I have these marks at the bottom and at the top of my paper, I'm going to use my ruler to line up those marks. And this is where some people start to make mistakes. If you get the measurements done, it's this lining up of marks that people sometimes have troubles with. 1, don't draw the line until you are sure your ruler is lined up to those little marks that you made, those little measurements. Number 2, if you're not sure of the thickness of your tool, so the pencil point, you can put the pencil point on one of the marks and then pivot along the edge of it to line up those marks. Okay. And then once you have that, since we're going to be making squares and we're going to be cutting them out, you don't want to just go from this mark to this mark. You want to mark the entire piece of paper with that line. So I'm going from the very edge of it down to the very edge down here. I'm not stopping mark to mark. And notice my pencil point position. It's beside the ruler. I'm not pushing my pencil point into the ruler. And this hand that's holding the ruler is the one that has the most force. I'm not putting a heavy pressure on my pencil. I just need it to make a mark. I don't need it to make a dark mark. If I put my pencil point in this way, sometimes it will slip underneath the ruler and then you end up with a misdrawn line, or it forces the ruler to one side. So you want to glide your pencil point along the ruler. Okay, so once I have that one made, I'm going to go on to my next set of marks. And again, I will line those up with my ruler. And I want to make sure they are lined up before I start drawing. And again, from edge of paper down to the edge of the paper, I want to draw those lines. And I'm going to move over to my next set of marks. Top to bottom, line those up. So there are 4 3-inch sections. So I need to make this into squares. So now that I have these lines drawn, I can now turn my paper, and I'm just going to turn it 1/4 of a turn. So my lines that are vertical right now should become horizontal. And now I want to do the same thing. So along the bottom edge of this paper, I'm going to line my 0 up to the left edge. And I'm again going to make marks every 3 inches because I want 3-inch squares. And again, the 9 inches at the end of the paper. And again, I don't want to turn my paper. I want to slide my ruler to the top. Line up the 0 to the left edge. And again, make marks every 3 inches. Now, if you're using copier paper for this or cardstock, it probably only measures 8.5 by 11. So that means you're only going to get 2 rows of 3-inch squares this way, and you're going to get 3 rows in this direction. Okay, so that's okay as long as the ones you do make are 3 inches. So now that I have my top and bottom marks, I am going to line up that top mark to my bottom mark. And again, I want to make sure this is lined up before I draw the lines. And once again, I'm going to go at the edge of the paper all the way down to the bottom edge of the paper. Okay, I'm not stopping at the marks. I want these guidelines to cut these squares apart. I'll go to my next mark, line this up, and again from the top edge to the lower edge, draw that line. And now I have 12 3-inch by 3-inch squares. So the next step then to create them into squares is to, of course, cut them. So I'm going to use scissors, and I want to very carefully cut along my pencil marks. So take your time with this, because as I said, it's very important that your 3-inch squares are 3 inches. So once I have one row cut, I can cut all my rows, then come back and cut the individual squares out. I can finish cutting this row off of the main page and then cut its individual squares out, just as long as I end up with my 12 individual squares when finished. Okay, and that is how you get 3-inch by 3-inch squares using a ruler.